have a problem with pets, find out who is interested in pets. The association that I worked with a couple of months ago, and I actually wrote about this in the CAI newsletter, it's going to come out shortly. They had a problem where the declarant at the inception of the association had said, pets are allowed at the discretion of the board. That's an almost verbatim quote from the declaration. Created a real problem because it's a Park City community. The developer hires a sales team. The sales team sees people come up, they want to buy a condominium, and they say, that those that look at the declaration, they say, well, what's this pet policy about about pets? He'd kind of size them up if they look like they like dogs. The realtor would say, oh, board's going to let everybody have pets. If they looked like somebody who didn't want pets, who was going to be here part of the time, he'd say, oh, board's only going to allow pets for service animals. I say he, but this is what the sales team apparently was saying, because I represented the association right after transition, and I heard all sorts of people say this. Realtor told me X, realtor told me Y. Different realtors telling different stories. So immediately what happens is the board comes in, and they're getting approached all the time. I want a pet, I want a pet, I want a pet. They decided they wanted rules. The original president of the association, actually the original board of the association, I shouldn't pin him on it, came to the conclusion that this association, which was small townhomes, not much lawn, right next to a nature preserve, was not a good place for outdoor animals. So they essentially adopted a policy and said, you can't have dogs unless they're service animals. You can have up to 2 cats, you can't let them outside off the leash. Almost immediately, people threatened to sue because they had been told by the realtor they could have pets. I was of the opinion that the board had the authority to adopt that rule. Several people told me I was wrong, that I was going to get sued. The association was going to get sued. One lawyer out of New Jersey had a dog, and the association also was going to fine $500 a month for dogs. The lawyer out of New Jersey was paying $500 a month for the privilege of having his dog. Again, this is his second $1 million home. Actually, it's only half $1 million home. So he could afford $500 to have his dog there when he came out to Salt Lake. Put his dog on the plane, I guess. So ultimately, we decided we had to enforce the thing with a lawsuit. We filed a lawsuit. He threatened to file a counter lawsuit to seek an injunction. Ultimately backed off. That was the policy for a number of years. We had a number of pets snuck in. Meanwhile, people wanted pets. People wanted pets. The new board comes in. The new board wants to adopt a policy allowing pets. The new board announces they're going to do that. Almost immediately, there's a threatened lawsuit. So what we did in that association is they put together a committee, an ad hoc rules committee. They got some people who wanted pets. They got some people who didn't want pets. They had 4 meetings, and they said, we're going to put together a proposed rule that will allow pets, and we're going to talk about what are the problems with pets here. Problems with pets, there's not a lot of lawn, there's a nature preserve right next door, so there wasn't a lot of place for big dogs to run. The usual problems with pets, people not cleaning up pets, all of those problems, people being afraid of pets, people being noisy. So they went through a process and they adopted a proposed rule. Going back to the distinction between restrictions and rules, I recommended that they try to get a supermajority to adopt this rule as a restriction in the declaration, because I was afraid that the board's going to come in, make this rule, and in 5 years a new board's going to come in and get rid of dogs. We put it out for a vote. We offered Home Depot cards for people who voted, sort of a lottery. Tried to get everybody to vote. We ultimately got about 84% of the people who owned in that association to vote, which I think is rather phenomenal for Park City. But we needed 67% to vote in favor of the amendment. 67% of those who voted for it. We didn't get over 67% voted for it. We couldn't get 67% of everybody. So in essence, the people who didn't vote became no votes. So it was adopted as a rule. It was adopted as a rule. It's been fairly aggressively, it has been aggressively enforced, I'm told. And I haven't heard any word since then about threatened lawsuits or discord. And the board is free to move on to more important things like the construction defect lawsuit they've got going on. So that's the process that they went through. The board could have just said, this is going to be the rule. That was what they were originally going to do. They backed off, they had the committee, they had input, and they ultimately got community buy-in, which was very important in their circumstance. And I think that's really important. Yes?
So I think a bigger issue, at least in our HOA, is not like deciding what we want the rules to be, but how do we enforce them? And where you just have a board of volunteers, like, you know, you have the police, management isn't going to have time to walk in the community every week, so what do you do?
Okay. That's the second half of my presentation. I promise we'll get there. Because it is a big issue, and it is critical to successful rulemaking and rule enforcement. We're going to go through the process of adopting rules first, and then we'll talk about how you enforce them. That having been said, you give me a good transition for my next point, which is the enforcement of your new rules starts the minute you start to adopt those rules. Because it's going to be a lot easier to enforce the rules if you've got the community behind the rules. If you just tell the community, these are going to be our rules, garbage cans need to be in by 8 o'clock in the morning, the following morning after delivery, they're going to think that you're a bunch of Nazis. In this day and age, they'll probably think you're socialists because anybody who's bad in this day and age is a socialist, but whatever, we call them names. And it's not a good way to create community. So what you ought to do if you decide that your association needs rulemaking is invite homeowner participation. And invite the people who care, invite the people who complain about your rules, invite the people who complain about parking, invite the people who complain about dogs. Get them engaged, let them know what the problems are that you're encountering. And when you're going through this process, communicate to the association what you're doing. That was very critical in connection with this dog example I gave. The committee was meeting, and they were also had an email going out after every meeting saying, this is what we discussed, and they kept good minutes of the meeting. So everybody in the association knew that this was being well thought out. It wasn't just, pro-dog, anti-dog. So that's a good thing about enforcement. But then look at, are your existing rules inadequate? Is the situation really that you've got the rules, but you're not just enforcing them? If so, you might not need to adopt the rules. When you adopt your rules, make sure that they're clear, but don't make them any broader than is necessary. You don't necessarily want to create a community where nobody has any freedoms, because that's sort of what gives community associations a bad name. Make certain that they're reasonable and uniform in application. If you're going to make distinctions between neighborhoods, make sure that they make sense. Out here at Daybreak, there are a number of sub-communities. They have different rules and regulations for the different communities because the townhomes have different concerns than the condominiums do. So you got to keep that in mind. Last item, going again back into engagement, have community support before they're adopted. When you adopt your rules, you should adopt them through a resolution. And there's a sample in your materials at page, I think it's 83 or 84. But you should have a formal document that talks not only about what the rule is, but talks about the authority. It's on page 93. No, actually, that's our rules enforcement resolution. It's on page 83, I was right. It talks about where's your authority, talks about what's the purpose of the rule, what's the scope of the rule, who does it apply to, what are the specifications. Again, there's a course on this, though we'll spend hours going into the details of this, but you're going to want that resolution because you're going to want to have 5 years from now when a new board wants to change that rule, you're going to want them to see that your board went through a process of thinking about what the problem was. There is a need for pet restrictions because people aren't cleaning up after their pets. 5 years from now, if people are cleaning up after their pets, they might not think there needs to be a rule that people get fined. It's probably not a very good example because common experience tells us that people need to be incentivized to clean up. A lot of people need to be incentivized to clean up after their dogs. But give some history as to why. What are the resources needed for enforcement of your rules? Going back to this pet policy, the association set up that the dogs would be tagged, so they had tags for the dogs. If a dog was authorized in the community, they had to have a little orange tag, visible tag, so that people would know the dog was licensed, and so that the dog was off leash. You could identify the dog, you could approach the dog. So they needed the physical resources for that. They needed the ability to have somebody go up there and check the dogs. They actually increased the budget for their property management company with the expectation the property management company would be doing more on-site inspections, looking for loose dogs, dogs out of leashes and stuff like that. So think about the consequences of the rule. Then communicate it to owners, and once you've adopted the rule, monitor it, evaluate it, improve it, see if it's working. If it's not working, reconsider the rule process. We're kind of flying through here, because we have to. Got a lot to cover in the next few hours. And I'm going to move on to the enforcement aspects now. Does anybody have any questions about the rule adoption process before we move on? One thing to keep in mind in adopting rules, the first thing to keep in mind probably, is you're going to have to be familiar with the other governing documents and determine that you have the authority to make rules and that you're not making rules that are inconsistent with your regulation. Or your declaration. If your declaration says you can't have pets, you cannot legally adopt a rule that says you can have pets. In that situation, you're going to have to go back and amend the declaration. However, if your declaration says you can have pets pursuant to rules created by the board, then you can do the rules. Or in the situation I had where it says you can have rules, you can have pets if allowed by the board, my opinion was, and is, and was agreed by everybody on listserv after several people told me I was up in the night. I sent it off on a condo listserv and got sort of consensus from all the lawyers who practice in this area that indeed if the board has the authority on a case-by-case basis to allow dogs, they can adopt a policy for dogs. So that's where we're on that. You got to make sure you have the authority.